at you.
Yeah, let's go ahead, yeah.
But if we can wait for Derek too, because actually I start out with a little bit of homework. Okay. You're making me hungry now.
You didn't give me something.
Oh, there's something there that
I
I
saw Ruth there,
yeah.
since he wasn't here.
I know, I'm a little focused on the cookie right now. I wish somebody would hide that.
Let's go ahead and get started.
Okay. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and want to be clear from the outset that this is actually our 2-hour training. It is a free service except for mileage of the School Boards Association. This is not a pitch or any connection to AASB superintendent search business. As you know, we are in the business, and we may or may not, if you decide to use a firm, put in a proposal. But we make a very distinct, line of demarcation between, pitching a service and providing training. I like to call tonight a facilitated discussion of the questions that you need to answer as part of a superintendent search, but not necessarily answer them now, but kind of get in your mind the questions that you're going to need to address, and some background information to kind of help you process through that. I like to start, though, before we get, and everyone's gung-ho, particularly this board. They want to answer the questions. You've got issues, you've got interims, you've got processes and timelines, is to ask you to take the two steps backward, and to think more about what you're going to do in terms of selecting the next leader for the Hoover school system. This should be a very exciting time for your community. And I like the board, after you get the interim process behind you, is really to look at this as a pivot, as a step forward. It's about the future. This isn't about the past. This isn't about past personalities. And I really think that the direction that the board sets will be the direction that the community sees that this is moving forward. This is about looking beyond. Now, one of the things I'm going to really ask you to do is start thinking about the qualities and characteristics of the next superintendent that you want, as well as the issues and challenges that individual has to face. And the reason I want you to take just a few minutes to do that, now later on in the process, I would hope you take a more substantive time and process for going through that, but is to kind of really get you focused on that pivot forward, that this is about looking ahead. Now, having said that, particularly this is the one time I'll make my audience commentary, I want you to feel free to talk about those characteristics and not think in anything in terms of the context of the current personnel. There may be many qualities of the current superintendent that you want the next superintendent to have. There may be other qualities that perhaps you would like to see a little bit more of or a little bit less of. Organizations, particularly school systems, evolve. And I can think of a circumstance of another school system, actually it was a startup school system, that they had a pretty tight timeline in which to get the negotiations or the separation agreement, start school, and build new schools. This was a plan of the entire city. And they hired a kind of get-her-done, gruff kind of leader. Did a fabulous job, got the schools built and renovated, on time, under budget, got everything done exactly on the schedule that they wanted. But, after about 6 or 7 years, though, that get her done now in my timeline kind of wore a little bit thin with parent groups and other folks. And so, as the organization transitioned into a new phase, it was time for a different style leader. So all that in terms of background is, as you're looking at that, everyone has a folder that has an agenda that we're going to go over. It's got our objectives for tonight, but it has a leadership profile preference scale. It's a white sheet of paper with a grid, and it has a yellow sheet that's a fill-in. While you're finishing eating, I'd like you to complete both the leadership profile preference scale, and there's a point to these, and then look at the yellow sheet. The yellow sheet asks you to do 4 things. The first thing is to identify the goals and challenges for the next superintendent. If you were going to look at whoever that next superintendent or candidate is and said, the number one job in Hoover schools is to do blank. Our immediate concern is, job one is blank. Those are the issues. One, and there's 3 spots. The next part of the sheet asks you to look at skills and attributes needed to be able to accomplish goal 1. First of all, that's the job, then how are you gonna know that person can do the job? This back half of the sheet is a similar, it says what kind of qualities are important in that individual. Qualities different than necessarily things they're going to do, and what would be indicators of those qualities. That's important for you to start thinking in terms of indicators or things you're going to look for, because how do you know someone's a visionary? How do you know someone's an out-of-the-box thinker? What are you going to look on a resume? What question are you going to ask in an interview? What kind of references are you going to look at that will tell you that that person can do those things? The reason it's important to have these kind of discussions now is that you're going to see a lot of candidates. And sometimes it's easier to go with what they're selling as opposed to what you need. If I took the 4 of you to a car lot up the road and said, go buy a vehicle for the Hoover City Schools, you easily could go into 4 different directions, or Derek's here, 5 different directions, unless you had a shared sense of understanding of what the system needs. The benefit and value of this discussion will be to hear each other talk, because I promise you, everyone at this table will add something that perhaps hadn't been on the list of another board members, and you'll think, yeah, that's important. And this is all part of the process of getting the board to kind of come together and think about, that profile of the leader they're looking for. So, while you eat, take time to do the preference scale and your skills, goals, qualities, and indicators sheet.
It's hard to, because he didn't have a lot of this, and yet he's done a very good job. Okay. Right.
They have to make those value decisions. If you're looking for somebody, what's more important?
But interesting enough, I want to hear what they do it.
Okay, and I will summarize all of them and send them to you, but thoughts or takeaways on the leadership profile, the inventory?
Well, for me personally, probably the top 8, 9 to 28. There's no wavering for me, personally.
In terms of those being all very important.
But the top ones, successful experience as a superintendent, and he wasn't a superintendent before. Successful classroom teaching experience, he wasn't a teacher before. Successful experience as a school principal, he wasn't a principal before. Central staff administrative experience, and I guess he was central office since he was our CFO. Earned doctorate, he didn't have that. Do we want to look for that this time? Sense of humor.
Actually,
I
I would go for that as being kind of essential, frankly, in the business. It's
y'all
not.
think it's very important that somebody have a sense of humor? So I'm just saying. Stephen? You on the same page, or we're totally different?
Well, I was very heavy toward 4 and 5 for sure, because I think if we have the opportunity to choose a new leader, we need to shoot for the stars. And have somebody that is experienced and savvy as anybody anywhere in the country. So I was real heavy toward 4 and 5.
Well, don't disagree with you. I guess to get down to the very important, in no particular order, ability to initiate and adapt to change. strong analytical and problem-solving skills. Some of these overlap. Visionary and goal-oriented, which involves change and go right back to the same one. Committed to long-range planning, again, same question. Demonstrate sensitivity toward diversity and diverse groups. That's the 5s I've got.
Earl, any thoughts?
I differentiate a little bit between 4 and 5, and then 1 and 3. Strong instructional leaders is a nice thing to have, but you've got a lot of people behind you that carry that ball. You know, Don, to your point on the doctorate thing, doctorate to me indicates the ability to commit to something, follow through, get it done. Yeah, he said something about CPA, so that's probably
Good evening, good evening, good evening.
Hey.
all right.
And that's one of the things that will tell you, you know, that one of the other takeaways is, you know, there's a variety of skill sets that could be successful. And maybe, you know, to keep an open mind in terms of earned doctorate, one of the things we always tell you is you always set your qualifications that, you know, to be more inclusive than exclusive. And the end result, you might decide candidate A as opposed to candidate B, partially based on an earned doctorate or not. But you may not want to exclude anybody. You know, in a search process, you want to throw the net wide to bring in all possible good leaders. And then things that are more important to you or not can help be the deciding factor in other things. And I think you brought out the point that we're also trying to make, that there's 2 ways of doing it. Andy was, or Mr. Craig was probably one of the first, you know, was the first model of a CSFO / you know, as an administrator of a school system, but it does work. The idea is that it is a team approach. So if you go for a leader who's very strong, let's say in curriculum and instruction, you know, in a more traditional route, it is equally important that the team have, or the first hire is somebody who is critical in that you know, CSFO role, because it is very difficult to find someone who's exceptional in all categories. And so that is also part of it, is learning to start thinking about those in way and have the conversations. This is a first blush at starting to think about it, but I do think it's important that you think about it, and in particular, bounce ideas and have discussions with each other, with community members, to find out what that profile looks like.
You know, tell another thing on doctorate, I mean, if you're a PhD, okay, you can do some research, I got that. Or if you're an ED, then you're more of a practical kind of person, which is maybe more applicable in classroom settings, you know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the doctor doesn't mean you're, I mean, just because you're a doctor doesn't mean you're covered all bases.
Exactly, and so, you know, in all other categories too, you know, be inclusive. All right, in terms of that first question, and I'm sorry, Derek, we'll catch up real quick.
That's right.
You got out of doing the C homework. But we're spending perhaps like the first, you know, 20, 30 minutes to look at that profile of the next leader and the expectations of what that individual is supposed to do. And excuse me, it's important for the board to start to develop a common idea of what that individual is going to look at, because that makes the selection process much easier if the board in fact starts unifying around the concept of what it is. And of course, critical to that is, what are you going to ask that person to do? So we're going to go reverse order. Earl, if you were looking at right now, and the beautiful thing is about it, folks, this is what you're thinking about in December of 14. This is not the final statement. There is time. This is the beginning of the process. You know, most masterpieces aren't created with what first is thrown on the canvas. So no one should take this as the final end all of what Hoover is looking for, but the thought process. If you were going to say right now, what is job 1 for the next superintendent, what would that be?
I suspect it's going to be improved academic achievement.
Okay. Oh, I'd love to hear that one. Okay. Anybody else have this on their list? And I'm sorry, for those at the back end, you're gonna say, okay, that's 1, Okay, anybody
I didn't
else?
get that part yet, sorry.
Okay, so, all
That
right.
would be number
So we
one,
at least,
right?
you know, we get, we've got two. All right, Craig?
No, I raised my hand,
Yeah, no, I know, okay. What else, what would be on your list? You've got something different in terms of the goals or challenge, job one?
Specific to our district, I mean, we
Yes.
obviously have several things that come together. I mean, potential zoning, no child left behind, which can go into Title I. I mean, just understanding the challenges from the court, making it fit within our system and going back to the first.
Okay.
External
Put all that
intervention.
on.
What,
External intervention.
okay.
Yeah.
Does that work for you, external intervention, you know, dealing with external?
Challenge. It's all accumulation to get to the first thing you just wrote up.
Impacting system. Yeah, I gotta get that. Okay, we mentioned. Et cetera. Okay, is this on anybody else's list?
I had some broad, a little bit more broad topics that's what stuff I had in mind.
Okay, so we kind of got some around this. All right, Derek, I do not want to put you on the spot, but
That's fine.
do you want to throw, you can take a pass. If you want to throw out, you know, what is, if you were looking at the next candidate for the Hoover superintendency, you wanted to say, I think the most important thing you need to focus your time and energy on is, and fill in that blank, you know.
All the seminars and training are going, a lot of times you hear one of the main concerns about the gap, disparity in education.
Closing the achievement gap?
A lot of studies over the years have been taking place with that. So for somebody that want to take a serious look at the data
Mhm.
and really solve these challenges, tell you the common approach of saying it's the parents' fault. Actually kind of look at that data and see how we can close those gaps.
Okay, would you consider that a subset of this, or is it important enough for you to make it separate?
It's important enough to make it separate because proven academic achievement, I mean, I know we're going to this test model, everything's about testing, but what does that really say?
When you find out here shortly.
Well,
We'll find
Okay.
out shortly.
All right, does anybody else have closing achievement gap on their list?
I didn't get the
I
part.
must have put it. That's all right.
But I agree with all of this.
All right, well, there's a lot of support. All right,
I found it very interesting that we had to identify goals and or challenges,
uh-huh,
because to me, they can be completely different. A challenge that our new superintendent may face may not be a goal that he has for our system.
mm-hmm.
So,
And that was deliberate that way,
Mhm.
you know, because some folks focus on, but, you know, if the first thing that you hit the day that you kind of got to get checked off the list or that you're going to have to deal with. And there's more than one, so if you want to take it in a different direction, that's fine. I mean, you're the one shopping for the new leader.
First, individual has to understand the system and develop a vision. I mean, we gotta have an actual set of, no, we go along with that vision, but do we look at that strategic plan? Or do we redefine that? I mean, each leader has his own looking for things.
I'm gonna read the three I wrote down.
Okay.
Because I think it, and they're not necessarily in order, but they represent both challenges and possible goals
Mhm.
to reach. I had financial stability, maximize our diversity, and long-range planning.
Right,
Now, that accomplishes, that's a whole bunch of stuff lumped into those.
okay. Right.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's why I was saying, yeah, all that I agree with, but I don't know if those are goals or challenges or both.
Almost exactly that.
Plagiarism. I think there are legal
I didn't know if
expectations.
that's wrong.
What we said, Earl?
I think there's legal expectations. You got to
What?
submit long, you got to submit a long-range plan, you don't have a choice. Financial stability, you don't have a choice. And those are goals, they're driven by legal expectations.
Okay, and your last one was?
Maximize our diversity.
What do you mean by that? I'm not sure I know.
We have a very diverse system, and I think it could be a huge positive for our entire system. And that person has to accept that and use it to our benefit, rather than trying to, I don't want to say hide behind it, but maybe dodge it or sidestep it, but to embrace it and make it a model for everybody.
I love the term embrace, yeah. It's what I wanted you to articulate. The reason I'm asking you to do this, there's no right answer, there's no wrong answer, but it does start driving the point is that you ask specific questions and start looking at candidates. You want to drive down to, what have you done about closing the achievement gap? How have you tried to emphasize or embrace diversity in your school system and make it work for you? Those are the kind of things, instead of the broad, good communicator, visionary, long-range planning, is to drill down and start getting specifics, all right? Just as an example, if we were looking at improving academic achievement, what would be the indicators, the second part? What indicators would you look at to see if somebody could come in and really improve academic achievement in Hoover City schools? What were the kind of things you would look for or want to see?
It's going to be data driven.
That, I was going to say, it's got to be data driven.
Yeah, this is probably the easiest one. Data driven,
You need to define the difficult to achieve.
Correct.
past performance, somebody who,
What about that baseline?
okay, and someone that relentlessly looks at and uses data. Okay, dealing with external factors, someone who has the skill set to be able to respond to, those outside pressures that need to be dealt with. And I think the point you're making with this, these are things you have to do. They're not necessarily goals, but if you don't deal with them in an appropriate, timely way, they can detract from moving the system forward. It's part of the system's business.
Well, we're involved down in the military status thing, so it's between that and some other criminal litigation, it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah. So that was a great, good management. All right. Push it further in terms of management skills, and not saying that somebody from a smaller system could do it, but would you have to look at somebody from a larger system that would have the ability to delegate and to multitask? That's something that would be at least an indicator, not that somebody can't in a small system, sometimes in a small system that they wear all hats. So that would be an indicator of that. All right, closing the achievement gap. What would you look at for that?
Data again, because it's easy to say that on the surface. If you want a person to say on the reading level, they come in at third grade or reading at level, they should be on the eighth. Just use that example and say, well, by this time they should be in the eighth grade reading level. It may not be realistic. I think you can use the data externally and develop your own as well, and keep track of that annually.
Okay.
Well,
All right, let me challenge you on that one. What about a candidate from a system whose test scores weren't particularly high? Would that concern you?
See what they did with it when they
Yeah,
got those.
yes,
and
right.
What the progress.
Exactly.
yes, yeah.
Exactly, although some people, that's not a high performing school system.
That's right.
But you have to look at where were they when he started or she started, and where did they go? So,
Yeah.
that's an indicator of, where did, and same thing,
Well, the flip side of that, if it was Dickie Barlow, you would not necessarily be able to, benchmark that too well.
And it's,
well, yeah, in
It's-
certain school systems, that's right, yeah.
in systems like that, in your experience, do they develop internal models as far as developing where their kids, you know, you're looking at all third graders and they're on this particular level, how to follow that.
Yeah, well, that'd be the questions I would ask, you know.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it is not, you know, it hasn't been done as regularly and systematically. I think to
Right.
some extent, No Child Left Behind has forced us to look at data in ways we've not looked at before. The ability and the need to do it existed before NCLBA, but unfortunately wasn't just as, you know, if the scores were good, we didn't look at the gaps, but.
Right.
You know, the other thing, just from
Dashboard.
this discussion of 1 and 3 there is that, you know, it's not the superintendent's responsibility, it's his accountability ultimately, but it's responsibility to get people to do the job who are responsible. In other words, you know, you've got curriculum directors, you've got people working in curriculum, and superintendent's not gonna get in the classroom all the time, these other people will, and he needs to hold them accountable for that.
That's an excellent, you know, sometimes when this is thrown up there, a lot of folks said the ability to hire, retain good staff, and hold staff accountable for doing their job. That's an excellent point. We can add anything we want.
I mean, it's on his watch, or her watch, but.
Which I think was a strong indicator
Yeah.
with Mr. Craig, because he had key people in key roles, or he has key people in key roles. You know, superintendent cannot be everything to everybody. Especially when we hired Mr. Craig back in 2007.
It's not his job to do everything, but it's his job to get, or her job to get, make sure everybody gets it done. Okay, just real quick, personal attributes, qualities you want to see. And I think what we just talked about is one of those can fall in both categories, the ability to lead and hold people accountable. But anything else on anyone's list, of some of the indicators, qualities?
Approachability, honesty, openness.
Honesty, you said one more thing.
Openness.
Openness, I think that kind of, all right. Anybody else have something like this? Or agree, you know?
Listening skill.
Huh?
Ability to be able to, like, approachable, but also listen.
A good listener. That's an excellent. No -10 for spelling, or I'll blame it on the bad marker. Craig?
I don't know if you can't put it in one word, but willingness to share information. I love information. One of the things I've frustrated in the past a little bit, there's only so many times you want to ask for information so the superintendent understands what I would like to know on an ongoing basis. That's just me. Now, I'm going to tell you, I'll ask questions till it drives somebody crazy.
Is transparency too
I
trite?
want to be, yeah, that's too
Good.
strong.
Okay.
Yeah, but that may be a little strong.
What did you say?
I do like transparency.
Okay, all right.
Well, we assume that has to be there with the board and wherever required for elsewhere, but understanding what the board wants to know, it can be too much information, so an understanding of the necessary flow of information to the
Yeah,
board.
intuitive, yeah,
Intuitive.
yeah, it's kind of intuitive in terms of being able to dial up or dial down what folks need. But the willingness to meet the need, I think, is, and the sensitivity to.
But I'd say it's important on the board's part to understand what's reasonable and expected, because concept and understanding what goes on a daily basis in the business life of the superintendent, most of us have no context there, and it is brutal. And
It is.
You can keep peppering them for all this information all the time, and that's who, doing so many hours in a day. So you gotta understand what's reasonable.
That's right.
Reasonable and relevant.
And that's what something you work on as a board. Now, sometimes folks might want a little bit more, but there at least ought to be a basic level of threshold understanding. Derek?
I'm trying to see how I can articulate this. You know, Hoover definitely has challenges. And going back to the willingness to share information, but as that subject point, to, in a sense, truthfully acknowledge the challenges we have and share how we're gonna solve it. Because, you know, a lot of times you may not wanna put the good, you know, you put the good out there, but you definitely don't sometimes wanna put the ugly.
Okay,
And it may come off to your community in a certain type of way that we may not be achieving in certain school systems or certain, you know, facets of our school, but be able to put that information out there to explain to our audience what's going on and how we're gonna solve it.
well,
It's a group.
You understand what I'm saying?
No, we're talking about the same thing to somewhat. Here's an example, we get a personnel report.
I'm adding on to it, put it like
Okay,
that. I'm not,
sorry.
there's no some,
Yeah, well,
I'm
here's-
taking what he's saying and,
Yeah, we get a personnel report and we see certain positions being filled on there. Sometimes it'd be obvious we would have a question before we approve that person or position.
mhm.
So after you ask for that, I understand this is HR, but still it's his responsibility to
Yeah.
understand. We might want more information about one position in our system than we maybe do another. If a substitute teacher is out on leave, probably don't need an explanation. If we're hiring a person in the central office, probably want to know why.
Yeah, what happened where?
and mine so much is keying in on student,
Okay.
student
Yeah.
data.
Going down, further down the road, that, you know, acknowledging, you know, sometimes the brutal realities. you
The
know.
good and bad. I mean, we
Yeah.
have, in any company, you're gonna have your pros and the cons, your strengths and weaknesses.
I think his ability to communicate those strengths and weaknesses, those good and bads,
Right.
can be such a positive thing, all the way that it's presented as.
Really well said,
Right.
ability to communicate good and bad. Because it's more than communicating, it's the ability. This may come out a little bit awkward. Some people can't communicate bad news in an appropriate, or in a good way. I mean, there's a way to deliver bad news, there's a good way to deliver bad news and a bad way to deliver bad news.
But if it isn't bad,
Yeah. It is what it is. It is what it is.
it is what
yeah.
it is.
Yeah. And it's an area in which you can target for improvement, but the facts are what the facts are. All right, I'm gonna send these to you, but truly, my whole goal in this is to kind of pick you and to get you thinking. Whatever you do for a search process going forward, you need to spend a little bit more time as a team working through these issues, listening to each other to help develop that profile. The cleaner the profile is, the more you're clear about what you're looking for, you know, the easier the selection process gets, because it is clear based on interviews and candidates whom the best fit is. And that is what we're looking for in the whole search process, is somebody who really fits well with the Board of Education. You know, you look across the state, most people who don't do well, it isn't generally performance issues. It's about not getting a good match with the expectations that the board has. And so we talked a little bit earlier, we were talking informally about making good match in terms of the qualifications you say you're looking for. If you want a non-traditional leader, you don't set very traditional standards, you know, that out of the box. If you want, you know, a visionary, then you have to be willing to look at some, you know, you have to articulate what a visionary is and be willing to go with that. I can tell you, there's school boards who will say visionary is one of those words we throw out that's what we want. Well, then they come in and people they have a vision, they start changing things. Oh no, don't change that. We like that. That's just fine. You know, look for what you want and get that. Don't, you know, there needs to be a good match between the two. All right. In terms of the questions, in your packet, you know, you pulled out those two pieces. We have our agenda. There are several other pieces I'm not going to go through, but there is a little booklet talking about the superintendent search process. There are some articles as references. But the fundamental issue is, as I said, these are the questions you need to answer. We're not necessarily going to come up with the answers tonight. This isn't, you know, a formal board meeting, but it's really to get you thinking. The last thing we're going to look at somewhat is the legal parameters for selecting a superintendent. And unlike most things you do in Alabama, there isn't a whole lot of legal, there aren't a whole lot of legal parameters. You have in your folder a copy of the act that says you have to post superintendent vacancies. This is where your, the 180 days come in for the interim. And beyond that, it says that the only thing you need to do is if you're going to have a vacancy within 90 days of the occurrence of the vacancy, the board has to announce at a meeting the process for selecting, the timeline for selecting the superintendent. That's on page 4. On page 5, it tells you what has to be in that posting, the job description, required qualifications, salary range, where to submit applications, et cetera, et cetera. And it basically says that you can have an interim served up to 180 days. Believe it or not, that's all there is. There is another purple sheet in your, and I need to bring this to your attention. This is a legality that impacts the process. In 2013, Alabama passed changes to its nepotism law, and it has significant impacts on school boards. I will tell you, we're still trying to figure out what that impact is. AASB has worked with the Attorney General's office, and I have seen no less than 3 drafts of Attorney General's opinion, all which were distinctly different in their outcomes and their implications. What the simple part of the nepotism statute, and this is why it impacts superintendent. You as board members have always been covered under the nepotism law, but if you abstain from voting, it's not a problem in terms of appointing relatives within the 4th degree of either 4th degree by marriage or by blood. It is problematic based on the 2013 amendments for superintendents and bringing someone in the system if they have family members that are employed in the system. Superintendents are not allowed to be in the chain of command of a relative. And the only exception is if the superintendent or the relative was already employed in the system. How far you're grandfathered in, we're not sure, because it certainly puts limitations on that subordinate relative's ability to be promoted or moved within the school system.
Is anybody in the school system not in the chain of command of the superintendent?
No. And that's the problem. These amendments were not really developed with input from the education community. The first ones were, it was changed in a Senate committee meeting, and to be honest with you, we are going to be working on changes to this for the 2015 legislative session, because I can tell you, if you ask 5 different attorneys, they can come up with 5 different interpretations. How far the grandfathering works, what does it apply to. So this is out there, and I just want to tell you that, 4 or 5 months, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months down the road, this may or may not be an issue in terms of your superintendent search, depending on the candidates. I will tell you, in other searches, it has been an issue of whether or not, a candidate withdrew or they felt like they could take the job. You're going to have to rely on your school board attorney's advice. We're still hopefully waiting for some advice from Dr. Bice, some guidance as state superintendent. He can give guidance on education law issues. But it's just kind of one of those things where it's not real clear, and it is a criminal statute, and so that's why we're real concerned. Hopefully, by the time you get into the thick of this process, AASB will already have had a bill introduced in the legislature and passed, but considering they come in March, that's a little bit less likely this time. Other than that, board policy. You need to check your board policy, and it looks like this is the board policy that we have, and so it doesn't have necessarily any specific qualifications or concerns that we need to be worried about, and that's a good thing. We generally recommend that boards don't set real rigid qualifications for the superintendent, because more than likely, the board that wrote the qualifications will not be the board that's hiring folks under those qualifications. And lastly, what's in there, it's a little bit different than what you have, is actually 16.12.2. 16.9.2 is for county superintendents. These are the qualifications for city superintendents in the Code of Alabama. And as you can see, it's basically, they have to have a degree, and they basically have to also be able to earn state certification. And we refer all questions regarding state certification to the State Department of Education. I'm not an expert on there. So, those are kind of the legal parameters. I would encourage you to work very closely with your school board attorney throughout the process. We are your organization, we're happy to work for you, but we always say we give legal information, not legal advice, and it's always a good idea to work with the school board attorney throughout the process, if any issues come up. Sometimes if you use firms from out of state, they're not as familiar with some of our quirks in Alabama law, which we'll talk about that. So therefore, it's nice to have somebody who's looking out after your back. All right. Believe it or not, the first decision facing the school board is whether you search or not. And I think based on conversations, it does sound like you're leaning toward search, but I want everyone to be clear that if there were a candidate in the system that all 5 of you thought clearly was absolutely the dead ringer to succeed, Mr. Craig, then you don't have to search. Alabama law requires you to post, but it does not require you to search. And the last thing we would ever expect a board to do is go through a sham search, is to make it look like we're going through a search when everybody, and I use that in quotations, knows who is going to get the job. In your packet is a list of, this is, the data's only as good as you give us, but it is a spreadsheet showing what school boards in Alabama have done when faced with the same situation that you're faced with in Hoover. And as you can see, if you flip to the last page, there are some that usually that don't search. I will say down the road, there are some school systems that are kind of growing their own. We've seen coach in waiting. Now we have superintendent search in waiting. I can tell you, you will have good candidates for your position, but overall, the applicant pool has been slightly more shallow. I think, the job is getting tougher. Folks are waiting till later on in their careers to move into these positions from time to time because, it's frankly, the tenure of superintendents, particularly in some areas, is shorter. There's a lot more public scrutiny. Public input involvement's good and scrutiny's good. It has just become a more taxing position than it has in the past, and it has hurt the applicant pool. Sometimes there are things beneficial. Georgia helped us out a lot. They passed a law that they've gone back and rescinded that basically was pushing folks out of their system, and they realized, oh my gosh, we're seeing retirements and folks moving on, so they've gone back and changed that. But let you know that, some folks do a state search, some do a regional search, some do a national search. It is slightly more blurred in the digital age of what are the parameters of a search, because when you post something on the internet, it can go anywhere. You can email something that it's not the same as having to mail out letters, but as you can see, we've done a little bit of everything. I would ask for you to treat this, is not to share this widely, because we have asked board presidents how they felt about the search process they used, and I think that they didn't expect that to be generally shared everywhere. But some use consultants, some don't, across the gamut there. And this is information that's reported from other board members. All right. Do you need an interim? Obviously, if you have your superintendent leaving December 31st and you have a vacancy, Hoover needs an interim. One of the things we like to talk about with school boards facing this situation is whether or not the interim should be a candidate for the system or be an internal candidate. And, in some cases, the board may or may not have a choice. But if at all possible, our recommendation to the Board of Education is to try to find an interim who will not be a candidate for the position. There's no way to guarantee this 100%, but I think the board can make its wishes you can't forbid somebody from applying for a job, but of course the understanding could be quite clear going in. The reason that this recommendation is made is that it actually works both the disadvantage to the board and to the superintendent. On one hand, it gives that person a leg up perhaps in dealing with the board and gives them a trial run that other candidates don't. On the other hand, you're probably not seeing that person in the true sense. If they know that the future employment is contingent upon making certain recommendations, you may not get the recommendation that's in the best interest of the school system in that time. so we think it's unfair to have to put candidates in those situations. In particular, I think you mentioned you've got some very controversial issues going up that may require a leader to make tough decisions, and tough decisions may be right decisions, but they may not be popular decisions. And so if at all possible, the interim should not necessarily be a candidate for the job. Also, you know, it just impacts the process. We think it hurts your applicant pool. You know, and ultimately, the point of the search is to get the best applicant pool possible. Now, let's going back and saying that with both the points of searching, is there somebody internally that might be a strong candidate, either for an interim or other position? Should the board decide to search, should be no reflection on candidates within the school system. This is a unique opportunity for a Board of Education. You have a responsibility to the community to look at a broad, good candidate pool. Even if you think that there are great candidates within the system or within the area, that doesn't mean you don't search. If you are at all uncertain that there's not somebody there that just jumps off the page and says, yes, this has to be the person, it is in the board's and the community's best interest to search. Because you never have that opportunity to go back and do it again. And so, having said that, you know, it's worth the time and the effort. When you look at the cost of a search in relation to the budget and the implications for the system, you know, it is pennies on a dollar. That should never be a factor. And again, even if there are strong internal candidates within the system, the search process generally makes it better. And I can say that from personal experience. I was a better candidate for executive director for having to fight for the job and think about what I wanted to do than had it just been given to me. And so, you know, there's really not a downside to search. The only downside is what I mentioned, a sham search, where, you know, it's going through the motions to please somebody and everybody knows they're going to get the job. Any questions?
Nobody would do that, would they?
It may happen. It may happen. Okay, what is your time frame? And the time frame, now, oh, one more point on the interim. And I was very impressed with the write-up of the last board meeting. The interim is not the focus. You need to get somebody in here who's qualified, who can get the job done. You know, it ought not be a lot of debate. You know, the idea is to keep the cart in the middle of the road, not go off on a ditch until you get the job done. You have an excellent administrative team in Hoover that can provide all the supports that person needs, so that ought not be a distraction. You know, it needs to be a quality person get it done, but that ought not be the focus, you know, by the board or in fact the community. It is really, you know, keeping everything together, you know, and somebody on paper has to be the person in charge, and somebody has to make the call if there's, you know, two inches of ice and say, hey, we're not having school today. So, moving on, the time frame for the search, obviously you have to work within your 180 days. You probably don't have as much time as you think you might. The clock starts when the position's vacant, and so your clock doesn't start until January 1, so that gives you 180 days from then. But, you know, the holidays, a lot happens. All right, back up. If you back up from 180 days, you know you need at least 30 days to post. All right?
Can it post longer?
Pardon? You can post longer, yeah. And so, but a minimum of 30 days to post. Okay.
Long as it doesn't break the need.
Yeah, you can, as long as you kind of back it up
Yeah.
in that. One of the other things, you've got to build in time to have somebody in play, because more than likely they're going to have to give notice.
Mhm.
You know, and most people in that professional position, it's probably 30 days. You might be able to get 2 weeks out, you know, and there may be some circumstances where they're available right away. But you've got to build in time for someone to give notice for that. So, you know, we've just lost 60 days of our 180. You know, consider spring break, consider graduation, giving time for perhaps 2 rounds of interviews. I asked Susan Salter on our staff to do a timeline, just as a, for example, of what a timeline might starting in January and ending with a June 30 or July start date. And, you know, this is obviously something that can change, but sometimes it's easier to see something on paper than it is to see, is to get the idea of what might happen at various stages of a superintendent search. you know, there's the initial stage, phase one, it's about, 3 weeks of developing that leadership profile, perhaps doing RFPs for search teams. Then there's a candidate recruitment stage, 6 to 8 weeks. You really don't want to shorten that, candidate recruitment period, and you allow,
Can you talk a little about leadership profile? What were we talking about there? Is there a formatted thing that we can operate from to develop it, or is something we conjure up on our own?
It is something, there are instruments, in fact, the one instrument that we use, the profile is one, and in it you can, I'm getting ahead of myself, leadership profile is a great way to get your input from your community. And so I would spend time on the front end with community engagement meetings and entertaining them in the same type of exercises that we did right now. What kind of qualities are going to be, do we need in the next Hoover superintendent? What are we looking for? So you use all those inputs in developing the job profile and the actual job announcement, because that'll give you some indicators. And that is really good time well spent.
So, on improving the leadership profile, once you get, think that, it's not a formal approval process. It's just everybody in agreement that this is the leadership characteristics we want from the individual.
Absolutely. It helps set your descriptors, and you use that to inform decisions the rest of the way. But it certainly is not a contract or set in stone. Someone has to have X or someone has to have Y. It's just, at least kind of tells you what you're looking for. Remember the analogy of going to the car lot and sending you all there. You guys gotta need to have a kind of a general sense of, do we want sport? Do we want luxury? Do we want off the road? Do we want economy? I mean, and I'm using that, as an extreme example, but the closer you can kind of describe what you're looking for in that leadership profile with inputs from the community, the better off. And can I emphasize the community aspect of it? It's better to get the community input on the front end as part of that development profile, because ultimately it's the board's responsibility to select the candidate. And so you want to give an opportunity to be heard and to be involved in the process, and the best way to do that is at the beginning of the process as opposed to at the end of the process. I will tell you, I have seen the community engagement process validate exactly what the board had done in its leadership profile. It showed that it was a good reflection. I can tell you in another community, the board profile in particular, the word on the street, how that happens, was that some board members were coalescing around an internal candidate. It was abundantly clear in the community engagement results that both the staff and the parents and community members wanted an outsider for the system. It just jumped off the page. Now, sometimes you don't get, those kind of results. There's not that kind of discord, but also it is very nice to have validation, like, hey, what we're thinking reflects what the community does. So, yeah.
Leadership profile.
Okay, you got
I've been polite over here.
Oh, okay. The online community survey you got in here, let's assume hypothetically that you guys are the people who help us with the search. How do you gauge the expanse of community that's surveyed? In other words, what percentage of are surveyed? And how do you get an accurate representation? Is it a scientific based survey, number one? Number two, is leadership profile characteristics a key part of that survey?
Yes, it can be. It's what the board wants to do. And know that going back, the survey, it's out there. Those who choose to participate. There, now it's possible to break down results by groups, so that these are the teachers or staff members that answered the survey. These are the results from parents. But there's no way to ensure that, it was an equal representation of, the Trace Crossings area as opposed to the Greystone area.
Well, no. I'm just thinking, when you say it's out there, you don't just put a link on the school board website.
Okay, yeah, it is a link on the website. Now, The other element that we do to offset the fact that maybe not everybody's comfortable or has access to that is that you can have community group, you can have focus group meetings.
Well, what I'm getting at is like, this is not like The Voice where, you know, you get some, you know, a candidate from Arkansas who's singing in the final, and everybody from Arkansas doing it. I'd say you go like New South, you do a scientific survey across the community to get a broad
Yeah.
assessment.
That's possible, but that's not in the general price range of most, you know, and I would say not just AASB, other superintendent search. You can make anything happen if you want, but taking time to get a representative sample and ballot of parents is, it probably
Cross-section of the
takes more,
community.
a cross-section of the community. You can work on getting the cross-section of the community. I don't disagree that in a perfect world, that would be a beautiful thing to do. The balance to that is that you have community group meetings, and by, you know, encouraging people to come in and invite people, that you, at least you try to balance that with ensuring that cross-section is represented in those meetings. And a report usually reflects both.
Based upon what I've seen through the years, you can't get there by doing that. You can't get a good cross-section. You know, you'll get the deck stacked one way or the other by those who really want to be active in the process. And there's a whole boatload of people who are going to not be active in the process, thinking like the, you know, less than the 27% of the American voting constituents who say, you know, it's going to be okay. No, it's not. So I'm just saying,
No,
that's something worth considering. And
It is, and if the board feels that strongly about that and wanting that input, that is a step you can take.
Well, Paul, Jim, so, Earl, I guess what you're saying, your idea,
my
don't
concern,
take, yeah, okay.
my concern is you can't get an accurate stakeholder representation unless you go about it in a scientific manner that's data driven.
You got it,
Yeah, but to put a link on a website,
yeah.
it's probably not, you know, you're subject to get.
And you may not know this, what ideas are out there for that? Because I understand what you're saying, anybody from.
Now, what you can do, not just a link on the
Mexico
website, I mean,
stuff.
you can shoot it to parents through your communications, I'm
Right.
sure you can shoot it to your faculty members. You know, it's harder, the general public at large is harder to reach, you know, in terms of that they would be subject to, you know, media outreach activities or communities. But no, it is not scientific.
I'm just saying, we've
Yeah.
done stakeholder surveys, and if you don't get people whose living is dependent upon doing it in a scientifically validated way, and you get the results you have confidence in, plus or minus a certain percent, you can get the deck stacked one way or the other, and what you're getting is, yeah, input from across some section of the community that you don't know if it's representative or not.
So you think it would be worth the money to spend then to hire?
It's not very much money.
Okay.
It's really not much money at all. In other words, I would say
Who
hypothetically,
we used in the past because we've done these.
hypothetically, if we use their content and New South's methodology,
Mhm.
you're there. And, you know, I'd want it to be representative and accurate,
Right.
you know, that somebody could.
Yeah, and we've heard that question too, the
Right.
possibility, is it possible to game the system? You know, there's just, you know, that there are in other communities, there are, you know, particularly, you know, folks who are activists who want to stack the deck in a certain way. I can say I don't think I've seen that in any of our results, you know, and sometimes the breakdown by groups can kind of tell you. Ultimately though, want to be sure, this is the board's decision. You know, the community inputs, but, you know, the board is duly, you know, appointed, and it's your duty to, you know, you have knowledge and expertise about the issues and probably have a better understanding of what it takes to succeed, you know, to successfully navigate and meet this board's goals and interests. And so don't get so carried away in, you know, being responsive and having inputs, but at the same time, don't make it sound like, you know, the board is going to only do, you know, it is.
I think the board's responsibility is to ensure an accurate cross-section of the community in terms of input.
I agree with that.
And if you you can't ensure that scientifically in database, then, you know, it's just still good.
Okay.
Just not do it just for the sake of doing it, actually have some meaningful data that you can look at.
And-
And I understand that.
Not that.
And I guess,
not be
I guess the
accurate.
argument has to be whether, what technique works the best. And how would you, I mean, how did you?
Oh, in all things, if you can do a random scientific study, that
Okay.
is always, you know,
Right.
a closer, you know, closer indicator than, you know, self-selection. I mean, it's generally a cost and time issue in those searches that folks feel like, that they can get, you know, solid inputs with the direction. And when you look at the issues, I mean, I would encourage you to look at the profile. I'm not so sure the kind of issues we're talking about could really be necessarily, you know, maybe subject to manipulation or gaming, but,
I think in everything else in life, it's all where you sit.
okay, all right. All right.
Did change the subject. What did Elmore County do? Did they get, what did they do? They did a very quick search.
Well, Elmore County, which makes sense because it's an elected
I
superintendent.
understand. I guess I'm just curious. Did they
Yeah.
make a decision?
They have not made, they're getting their finalist list at the end of this week.
Okay.
So they didn't hire an interim.
Well, they hired someone to finish Jeff's term for 2 years, so no, they don't need to, they will hire someone by the end of the week.
And they have to wait 2 years and run for election. Which is interesting, you know.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I read the Montgomery Advertiser every day, and we talk to her like this, so trust me, I read them both. They're covering it from front to back.
Oh, yes, it is. It is not without controversy. But, yeah. And, well, of course, anybody, you know, they ought to stand for election to be able to run the county.
You mentioned this one thing, or I'll think about this, you know, before we spent, I think, with Hazard Young and Tia, probably $28,000 on a search. And talking to Susan, I think your fee is $14,000 to do, we use AASB for a search. So if you want to use the New South component of it, just to consider, I mean, we're gonna be where we were before, I guess is what I'm saying, but like you indicated earlier, in the big scheme of things and the percentage of your budget, this has got to be a priority
Ensuring
for this
quality process, transparent process that the community and the board feels good about, you know, relatively, you gotta look at it in terms of percent of budget as well as the implications of when, you know, when the decision doesn't go right. And I'm not really talking about buyouts, but that's not cheap. It really is in terms of lost opportunities for the system. Most superintendents, this is something to keep in mind, you know, and when you look at candidates, most, you know, to come in and implement change in a leadership position takes basically a minimum of 5 years. You know, I mean, you can come in and put this program in and change things, and you can see, you know, spots of change, but really to get, you know, the ship kind of turned around or, you know, moving in a different direction, it takes time. It isn't something that, you know, people can do. You know, everyone talks about what you can do in the first 90 days. What you do in the first 90 days is window dressing, you know, and moving around, what's that leader going to do? It really, to build a climate and the supports for sustained change takes about, you know, 5 years, and it's really that 5 to 8 years. That's what you need to take, you know, for a superintendent to make that kind. And so when you churn, you know, superintendents within a time period less than that, you know, you are keeping the system from moving forward at as great a pace as it could be. You know, stability and leadership is imperative. While we're talking about things and other issues that impact this, got to talk about board behavior too. When you're looking at candidates, they're shopping for positions just as well. You know, for a superintendent in most cases means moving from a community, uprooting children, perhaps uprooting a spouse. You know, they want to know that they can go to a community where there will be stability, where there will be support from the school systems. Candidate shop systems and the quality of the board just as much as you shop for quality systems. So, you know, how the board is perceived, what the board does is an important part of this, because there's a lot on the line for the professional superintendent. Yeah, they get a nice salary, but it isn't that nice of a salary if you've got to sell a house, go buy another house, you know, perhaps have a spouse change jobs. Things may not be equal, and they choose to do this, I understand that. And so that they choose very carefully, and there's a lot on the line for a superintendent professionally to move into these positions. So, got to look at that side of the equation too. You know, we all love Hoover. We've all chosen to live here, but for somebody else, you want to come here and move here and know that there is going to be the potential for stability. All right. Type of search. We've talked about that already a little bit in terms of whether it's, in-state, regional, national. It's kind of blurred. But, the national is a slightly different element of the search because of the advertising in national publications. I will tell you some of your national firms probably have some ties in other states and can perhaps have perhaps you might see more candidates from out of state depending on the search firm you use. But it isn't numbers, and we're talking ahead of ourselves, it isn't numbers that are as important, it is the quality of candidates that are truly interested in coming to Hoover, Alabama. That is part of, you talked about gaming some of the system. A lot of folks, feeling, we had 25 candidates. Because of I shared with you, the candidate pool is been a little bit shallow. What you want to make sure is that you have candidates who are genuinely interested in coming to Hoover to work, that aren't putting their names in the hat, have a nice resume, have no intention of moving, but help fill out the roster. That is one of the things that you see happen from time to time. It's kind of the nasty side of the business. Just want to give you the heads up. But the scope of the search really comes down to advertising and where you place the ads. And as I said, but if somebody wants to come to Alabama or hears about Hoover, it's, with the digital age, it's very easy to get that announcement here. Folks will be looking. And so there's sometimes folks don't want outsiders applying for their search, and frankly, there's no way of controlling that these days. We are in a global world. Do you need a consultant? And you've talked about using firms, and you've used firms in the past. Alabama is unique as a state in terms of how we handle superintendent searches, both in our public records law and in the interview process. I was astounded to hear my counterpart from Mississippi said that their whole process is done. Nobody sees the application, nobody sees the interview, and they announce who the new superintendent is. That is not the case in Alabama. In Alabama, under state law, interviews are public. It is a public interview that's under case law, and all applications received by the Board of Education are public. That's, again, under our public records law. There is a belief or feeling among people who apply for superintendents that public disclosure has a chilling effect on the applicant pool. Put yourself in the candidate's perspective. If I have a great job and a great relationship with my board, do I want to be applying for other systems because the implication, or other jobs, the implication is I'm unhappy, I want, even though we know in the superintendent world, you usually move up to larger systems to advance. That is the perception that if, and why many boards choose to use a consultant, is because if the board uses a consultant, the applications go to the consultant and therefore are not public record. The board only sees, and this is an important part, the board only sees the candidates that are finalists.
Top three?
It depends on what the contract says and what the request of the board is. Now, the more that you ask for, the more, to be honest with you, angst among the superintendent candidates. It's a little bit like this analogy. If I went down, and I'm not saying it's fair, but it's a little bit like you go down in the morning and tell your spouse, I want a divorce. That's how some boards perceive you're looking for somebody else, or, well, I want to date around. And then you come back that evening, no, everything's just fine, I'm happy here. Have you done something to impact a relationship? that is, I guess, the closest analogy that sitting superintendents feel about putting their applications into other searches. How the process works when you use a consultant is all applications go to the firm, consultant, whomever. You contract how many finalists you want. The candidates are screened based on the criteria set by the board. And there's extensive interviews and conversations. They get a good feel based on your profile, your community engagement, what would work. And after the final list is developed, the consultant calls the finalists and said, you've made the short list in Hoover. Are you still in? And at that point, the candidate makes the decision they're going to continue on with the search, or they decide, no, based on something that's happened. And I can tell you a whole variety of things have happened between when you first apply and to what happens. We've had spouses get diagnosed with cancer. We've had, parents get ill and make a move away from the community, not sounding like a good dad. We have applicants who have been finalists in other positions and think they're going to get that position. Been a variety of things that have happened, but at that point, if they say they're in, then they understand that the application becomes public, and they will be in, on AL.com and other points, after it's delivered to the board. That's how that process works. What happens now? We're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about that candidate release and what happens with finalists. We've had a few things that have come up that have been a little bit interesting. Sometimes boards, think, oh, it's going to be so wonderful working for us in our community, and they get the candidate list and they're like, thought we'd get better than this. And boards have said perhaps less than flattering things about some of the candidates in the candidate pool. Guess what happens? The candidates bail on them. Certainly if you're the one that believe you were the target of it, but we have seen school systems, lose their candidate pool and basically have to go back to the drawing board because they decided that they didn't, and at first blush, they weren't real, before they interviewed anybody. You might want to make those calls before that, but whatever happens, whomever you use, whatever finalist pool you get, zip it until you talk to them and find out more about it. So, because that has a great capacity to impact that. Anything that you say favorable or not about a candidate, the other thing you need to know about candidate pools, again, it's a little bit of a situation where I have to go back to high school. You want to be, you don't want to be dumped. You want to be the, the dumper. And so if a candidate perceives, based on board discussion, interaction at the table, that they're not the front runner, guess what happens?
Withdraw.
They withdraw. They would rather they didn't get the job, the other person, and some of that you just can't happen, but just know from the outset that's, a little bit how that's happened. We had one system where, frankly, based on what board members said thus, no one was a front runner, and in fact, but the perception was an internal candidate was going to get the job, and they lost both other finalists. And, so, and a story. What you say and how you go through that process can impact who you eventually get to choose from. So it's the best time to be very circumspect in our comments. Treat everybody equally. Now, going back to the use of consultants, there's an article in your folder about how to select a firm. I would check their background, check other folks. Check somebody who's used them recently, because sometimes personnel changes in those folks. It's not a bad idea to ask them to get references. Some of the other downsides for doing the search yourself really becomes, again, if applications come to the central office, sometimes confidentiality can be a little bit of an issue. Obviously, we know that they have to be publicly disclosed if someone asks for it. But just to keep everything on the up and up, you don't want a certain, and not to say anybody in Hoover would do this, but again, you want to be above reproach. Someone could say, oh, so-and-so's application's come in. Did you know he got a D in chemistry, in undergrad, or share information, or or things perhaps aren't kept up in the right way, so there are issues. And again, the cost of a consultant can range greatly depending on whom you use, but cost ought not really be a factor. Just be sure that you're comfortable with the services that you're bargaining for with any type of search firm. All right. Qualifications for the next superintendent, we've ticked that off. There's state law, there's nothing in policy. We've talked a little bit about involving the community. Let me tell you one thing though, the way to go is the perhaps focus groups or community group meetings. I know in some processes they'll have groups of meetings with teachers, meeting with administrators, and meeting with support staff. And then perhaps later on they'll meet with community leaders. They'll have time for parent or other community groups, and of course then they'll have community group meetings. Nice time, you know, those are all inputs. I would not have a committee unless you, the best use of a committee I have seen has been similar to the development of the leadership profile, to engage community input in that. Again, because when you have communities on the back end, you know, the committees sometimes believe it's their job to pick the candidate. And so there's only 5 people that vote. And so you've got to, you know, that is a decision that rests with the Board of Education. Yeah.
You stated seeing the community focus groups work better. What application?
Community focus groups work better, you know,
Okay.
through the leadership profile. You know, where the community didn't work well in, they reviewed applications and made recommendations, and in that case they aligned, you know, behind certain candidates more so than boards. You know, and of course it made all the applications public. Small system, it wasn't an issue, but it became a very divisive issue.
Well, they work better in your expertise up on a type of setting.
At the first end, the leadership profile development stage. Now, remember, your interviews are in public, so there'll be an opportunity for the public to hear everything that the Board of Education hears in terms of an interview. And so, as representatives of the public, you will hear from and probably get input from community members, and that's appropriate. But, so the interview process is very open. Let's talk a little bit about the interview process, though, because it isn't just the interview at night. Now, this may or may not be different from what you did before. Typically, superintendent candidates come in perhaps the evening before. Might be an opportunity for a board member or two to meet them and, you know, have a meal with them. The next day, a tour of the city and some of the facilities would be in order. Might set up that community group meeting with community leaders, might have an opportunity for teachers after school to meet with the candidate. Generally then give the candidate a little bit of time to collect themselves before having an interview, probably in late evening, so parents can attend after work, you know, somewhere, you know, after 5 or 6. And then after the interview process, of course, allow any member of the public who has participated or watched the interviews, again, to meet the candidate. That gives, you know, it's a very transparent process. It gives community members, staff members, faculty members an opportunity to hear the interviews, to meet the candidates as part of the process. That is very time consuming for the Board of Education, particularly depending on how many finalists you have. If you have 3 finalists, you do this routine 3 times. If you do it, you know, 4 or 5. So considering the number of finalists that you have, the kind of work involved in that. But that gives you an opportunity to see how a candidate would do in a formal interview session, but also it helps you judge those other qualities and characteristics when you share a cup of coffee or you see them interact with faculty members. Helps give you different inputs for that decision-making process. At the actual interview process, I will tell you something that will be a little counterintuitive. We recommend that you give superintendent candidates the same questions in terms of fairness, that everyone have a set set of questions, and that they be given those questions in advance. And the reason you do that is twofold. First of all, it's a level playing field. In Alabama, because our interviews are public, whatever the questions are interview one, somebody in the audience, or because newspaper reports, is going to know exactly what the questions are, so candidates 2, 3, and 4 get an opportunity to prepare for those, questions. So number 1 gives you off-the-cuff answers, or thinks on their feet, and 2, 3, 4, and 5 can give you more contemplative answers. And secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, you're hiring a superintendent, you want to see how they think and analyze issues. You want them to give some thought and time and consideration to those questions, because that is really what you're hiring the superintendent. Not necessarily the glib. You will be able to assess that ability to interact with the public and think on their feet, throughout the social activities of the day. But you really want to see how that person thinks, how they approach issues. So those are our recommendations for the interview process. Tape those interviews. Hope nothing happens, but even driving to down Metropolitan Way, something might happen in a car accident. Family member might have issues that despite best of intentions, you need to go take care of them. So you don't want any member of the team to be at a disadvantage and not to have seen a candidate. So make sure you tape those interviews, and you may want to go back and refer to them. When you go through the interview process, really force yourself to record answers and perhaps numerical ratings of candidates, because I tell you, if you go through interviews 3 nights in a row or 4 nights in a row, after a while, things are going to start washing together. And to be fair to all candidates, is to help do a structured interview where you use numerical ratings. They're yours to keep, they're not to share. You're not going to pick a superintendent necessarily based on ratings, but it's to help you later on in the decision-making process. One of the things you may want to do after the superintendent interview process, if you still are not sure, look at site visits. That would be going to the community in which the superintendent candidate lives and meeting with community leaders and other groups about that individual. Some of that can be done over phone through references. I'm not sure that going down and doing a man on the street interview with somebody necessarily yields you, talk about reliable information. And remember, in this day and age, everybody probably has something negative out on the internet written about them. If you're in a leadership position working with children and money, that there's probably going to be a little bit of unpleasantry out there. Make sure that you filter that and work through sources to get to the bottom. Don't let something like that initially scare you. Sometimes there's more to the story than what you've read on a blog or somebody's Facebook post. It's one of those times where you really have to do due diligence. Sometimes there's so much information out there, it can cloud the issue. I would expect your search consultants to be able to screen all those candidates and know about something like that. I can cite a candidate who is very successful, and the board is very happy with her, but was quite worried. She was the systems point person in litigation from bringing teachers out of the country. And then there was lawsuits and things that happened with the firm that they had used. This individual had very little to do with it, but man, name was all over the newspaper as being involved in this. And once the due diligence was done, realized that this person need to be named in the lawsuit because that's how it's done, but really had nothing to do with this firm's improprieties with bringing teachers in. So I've talked a lot. What are your questions at this point?
Traditional versus non-traditional. Pros and cons, because in 2007, it was very important to the majority of the board that we look for a non-traditional candidate.
I think you've answered your question yourself in the sense you know that non-traditional can work. So do you go out looking for that, or do you, you know,
I wouldn't think so.
no, but you can be open to it.
Okay?
Yeah, and that's what we talk about in the qualifications. If you write your qualifications, you be, as I said, be inclusive. The tighter you write restrictions, that they have to have a doctorate, they have to have this, they have to have that, the more it limits your pool. You know, you can always decide to go traditional based on the applicant pool, but our recommendation is always to define the characteristics and the type of leader you're looking for without necessarily putting rigid requirements in there. Has to have, you know, has to have served as a superintendent, has to have 5 years as a principal, et cetera, et cetera. You know, even in the doctorate issue, let's use that as an example, if that is something you decide is important. There are some people that, you know, have AB, you know, everything but dissertation, you know, are very close, or maybe working on the dissertation, but technically can't say they have a doctorate. You don't want to write qualifications so strictly that somebody that's just right on the bubble that might get there, you know, may make in. So my suggestion is to you is I wouldn't get that defined, that you want, don't say specify traditional or non-traditional, but write fairly loose qualifications that you would consider and look at all times.
Once we get an interim appointed, the next step, in your opinion, should be to hire a firm?
If
Is that
that's
first
choice,
and
yeah.
foremost?
Mhm. I would put out an RFP and look for firms, and then you can take time to look at them. And I would do it sooner rather than later, so you'd rather get the luxury of time, you know, yeah. Heaven forbid, but if we have, you know, a snowmageddon, you know, that basically wipes us out for a week, you know, I mean, you know, let's just, you know, don't build a crunch time and just get it done sooner, because that way, you know, if something happened, you could have more time for community engagement. If you want to engage a public home firm, you know, that might add to those schedules.
Posting the position
Posting
for
position.
the permanent superintendent, when would you recommend? I'm looking at your time.
Okay, and let's do, you are, I didn't discuss time schedule because you are in the, what is, you know, traditionally the good window of opportunity for superintendent searches. Sometimes searches that are not in this window, you know, most superintendent contracts run, you know, end on a June 30 date. It's just something that's done, particularly in the education world. So it is a normal time for superintendents to start looking in the spring. They like to finish off the school year, finish up graduation, and kind of have, I guess, closure in that sense. So this is traditionally a very good time to look for superintendents. And if you've got the luxury of time, I would certainly have the posting, you know, 6 weeks as opposed to just 4, you know, to give yourself a little bit of extra time. The superintendent application process is somewhat cumbersome. You know, it's not like you send in, you know, those of us in business, we're always sending our resume. We tell folks what we want, you know, although, you know, more and more folks are going online and you have to fill out their form. You know, there's a lot to it, ordering transcripts, and so you gotta give them time to consider it and look at it. And as I said, they'll do their homework, they'll check out Hoover and the situation too, to find out if this is gonna be, you know, a good pick or a good match for them.
Would you want to extend the search, I mean, extend the posting time more than 6 weeks, because if you do it in January, it puts you in, say, mid-March relative, let's say, you know, it's back to the point you made earlier. If you're a superintendent in an existing job, aspiring to go to another job, once you get your name out there, and it's hard to keep things totally uncovered. I mean, you're out there, and it's like the questionable marriage. I mean, you know, you're kind of looking around, but you're not necessarily, yeah, and it complicates things. So the longer a prospect can extend that, the cloak of secrecy, if you will, the better for them, I think.
Yeah, you know, if it's out there, and of course, you know, then you've got your lead. And again, that part of the search actually moves pretty quick. Once you get the finalist report, you know, I mean, that really is kind of turned around in a 2-week interview. I'll tell you, there's having watched the process up close, you get the finalists, they meet, then they do serious vetting of the candidates for calls, you know, because usually the finalist list has a few extras, and sometimes folks don't make it, you know, don't make the final cut based on a few things. you know.
Well, if you look at the list you have, Bonnie, the superintendent, or the school districts and superintendents and the enrollments and salaries and the declining pool of potential candidates, what is the top 3 criteria that cause people to look for another job, other than the fact that they're dissatisfied where they are? In other words, if they're not dissatisfied, they're probably doing a good job, so you have to have some hook to get them out. Is it money? Is it geographic location? Is it prestige? Is it the fact, is it internal resources to the district? Is it-
Probably all the above.
I was gonna say, those are all great answers to your question.
Yeah,
You know, sometimes the
it is.
superintendent's frustrated that they could do more with resources. You know, it really is education's a calling, and the ability to be able to have resources to implement the programs, to implement a vision that you have, you know,
How
to
would
be
you
able to work
prioritize
with
all
that.
this? I just took off 4 or 5. What's the most important hook?
I don't think I can either. I mean, the hook's gonna matter for the individual. Some folks, you know, may have to get that first job, move to a small town, and really aren't a small town kind of person. You know, in some cases, you know, if you've had a happy job, but the dynamic on the board has changed greatly, and I have seen that happen, you know, an election or other issue comes in, and all of a sudden you realize, I'm gonna move out before I'm asked to move out. You know, that's an internal motivator, and I can't say that,
It probably differs from candidate to candidate, though. Think about that.
Yeah, it flips both ways, and it's probably something that you ought to be looking for just kind of intuitively as you watch them, because you can be a big fish in a little pond as a superintendent. You can also be a very small fish in a bigger pond as a superintendent, even though the pond is very large.
Have you noticed going from 6 weeks to 4 weeks to 6 weeks to 8 weeks for the posting, is there if you increase it out 2 more weeks, do you get X number of more candidates, or are you gonna get what you're gonna get in the first 2 weeks?
I think that the candidates, I think it gives, you know, word of mouth, people more time to consider, I think a little bit time, but no, we can't necessarily say that because so many of the applications come in at the last minute. They may know about it, may
Right.
be interested,
Right.
but the application doesn't come in to the last week or two. It's not as if, you know, you open it up that you get more applications on the front end. It just helps you, you know, kind of give folks a little bit more time to think about it and think, well, maybe, you know.
Depends upon the scope of the search too. If it's in Alabama, people pretty much know about Hoover as a district, as opposed to somebody coming out of North Dakota, or somewhere who might be interested in moving south.
Yeah, think of the scenario of somebody who's got a pretty good job, but, you know, and one of the things that you might want you to have an open mind about is that because many educators start in their profession relatively young, they sometimes are tapping out of their state retirement systems and still have a lot of vim and vigor, and, you know, and can go for another, you know, another 10 years somewhere else. And so you may have people choosing to leave, you know, to say, oh, well, I kind of thought about it, but yeah, well, I missed a deadline, not that time. You know, they're not so motivated until they really start learning about it. You know, that is the one thing, is that time does work to your advantage if somebody has an inkling, and it gives them a little bit more time to check it out. The people that you'd be most interested in are pretty busy people. You know, think about that. And so, has anybody here at this table had the occasion they thought they were going to do something in 1 or 2 days, and it's actually 2 weeks later that they finally get the follow-up?
But they're not too busy to know about the job open.
No.
Whether they heard about it from word of mouth, whether they read it in a periodical, whether they saw it online.
Mm-hmm. But do they immediately go look for it, or is it, you know, 2 days, later, or 2 weeks later? So I do think, intuitively, I can't give you anything better, that I think, 2 weeks, can give you a little bit more time.
To clarify, with the interim superintendent, those names do not have to be made public, nor interviews. If we choose to do interviews, that is not public either, correct?
No, and if you're going to interview a candidate, it doesn't matter that they're, it would have to be, if the whole board interviews it, because the pivotal factor is the board coming together for, as a whole in that interview session. And so that is,
what we did, or what I did at the board meeting Monday night is I appointed Mr. Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
I had asked the board members to come to the board meeting
Mhm.
prepared, the inevitable.
Yeah.
Once we got Andy's
Resignation,
resignation,
what
we've
are
been
we
waiting on
looking
the
for? Yeah.
resignation, okay? Then to come to the board table Monday night, which they did, with their top 3, 4, 5.
Characteristics.
Exactly. So we have, Earl has since taken those, so to speak,
Yeah. Mhm.
and, you know, we've received emails, obviously from interested parties. AASB obviously has contacts.
Yeah.
And so I appointed Mr. Cooper to bring back a short list of candidates to the board, and we've already scheduled a call board meeting for December the 19th.
Mhm.
Is it possible for us to be able to appoint that interim superintendent on December the 19th? Or not? What if he comes back with one candidate, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well.
I mean, because you think about it, we gotta have somebody that's
Oh, yeah,
effective
you've got-
January the
yeah.
1st. There's not gonna be a whole lot of people that's gonna be interested in doing this for us for a short period of time.
Oh, no, I mean, yeah.
So we may not have many choices, I guess is what I'm saying. And time is of the essence, and we're trying to get someone in place by January the 1st. How are we going, as a board, how are we going to?
But look,
The
once you
energy-
look at the list, you know, and if you wanna look at the suggestions that, you know, Earl puts forth, you know, in terms of, I would imagine, you know, you want him to kind of check things out, not you're not just a receptacle, but you're doing some checking and getting recommendations, yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting recommendations, I'm not conjuring up this list on my own.
No,
no,
yeah.
And I'm not gonna check them all out on my own, we're gonna have to share, we're gonna have to conquer.
Yeah, and I think, you know, based on that, you can make some informed decisions in terms of, you know, who's on the list. I would imagine some of them are probably retired superintendents whom, by reputation, you already know. I mean, look at Jefferson County, you know, they kind of knew Craig Pouncey, you know, I mean, that, you know, and so some of them might already have, you know, you might already know or have contact with. So I think it will depend on your, you know, your list of contacts, and you can identify the next steps. You're not required to interview if you don't think so, or you may want to,
That's
based
what
on
I'm
the
saying, the
list, to
interim
pick
is
up a
probably
phone
gonna
call.
be a proven,
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
No,
And
and
we're
it-
all gonna know, he's probably gonna be probably a high profile person.
That's what I was
we've
gonna
heard
say.
some at the Winfrey.
Oh,
that
yeah.
Presented this weekend.
oh, yeah, yeah, you know, that could
Got to be,
possibly, you know,
you know,
retire, you know,
firsthand.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, many of our consultants are former superintendents, so that would be, I mean, that is in the discretion of the board. Once you look at the list, you might want to, you know, you could choose to name somebody or authorize someone to make some contract negotiations on that, or you could choose to say, okay, you know, let's take some time to make some additional follow-up calls, you know, narrow it down to 2 or 3, and then set a meeting, you know, I hate to say it, a few days later, and make the decision that way.
Okay.
But I agree with you. I think you'll probably Earl will be able to come up with some names and probably receive some resumes and some suggestions of people who would be, you know, willing to do it and interested in doing it. But it is such a finite, you know, period of time, and depending on other obligations, that it's not going to be a terribly long list, and that ought not be. You know, based on that and the credibility of those type of people, I don't think you're going to have to do this extensive process like you do for a long time.
Yeah.
Because it's an interim position, you know,
You're
for
not
a
about
long
luck,
time.
because you're not gonna pay a relocation package, and
No.
there's a lot of.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're gonna have to have people who can meet Alabama's, you know, get Alabama muster, who it's reasonable for them to either travel here or, you know, temporarily relocate here. I mean, you know, willingness to do all that for a short interim. It's not going to be an exhaustive list, and you will, I feel pretty comfortable that there'd be folks on there that you would, by either reputation or a few phone calls, be comfortable having in that interim position, because it is an interim position.
We'll work that out pretty quick when Andy accepted the position in Montgomery. So we immediately started receiving emails, so.
Well, and as in, there are a lot of people who think that they may be qualified for the position, but it was good to see that the board identify skills and characteristics that they thought they were important. And as I think I read the newspaper, it was superintendent experience, you know, preferably outside the system, and read the article, yeah.
Someone that's not interested in the permanent
Yeah,
position.
not in the permanent
Doctrine.
position.
I
Yeah.
mean, we were pretty specific
Yeah.
about.
And so once you do that, the list gets you know, much shorter. And again, that ought not be the show, you know, that's just something you need to have to kind of
Exactly.
keep things going.
Okay.
All right, the only thing that we didn't talk about is, and I know it's way far down the road, but typically after you get through this process, there's a little bit of fatigue and you're tired of meeting and tired of being together. Don't wait too long to think about how you're going to evaluate that superintendent and or compensate that superintendent. At some point, you know, you have to post the salary range in the job description, but you need to know in those conversations what kind of salary they are anticipating or expecting, or have an idea of what you're willing to pay, because you don't want the whole thing to fall apart about money. And I have seen that happen. You know, the negotiations began, and I guess the superintendent candidate thought he had some leverage because it was announced in the public, this is who we want, and played hardball with the board. And so things fell apart there. So make sure that, you know, based on the range, that there's you can come to a meeting of minds, not an exact figure, but that they're relatively comfortable. And as part of that discussion, talk about, you know, evaluation. You know, what are we going to do? You don't want to wait to 6 months into the new superintendent's term and the first little ripple kind of hits, and all of a sudden like, well, how are we going to evaluate this person? You know, what are we going to do? And so that needs to be something, you know, perhaps, you know, 60 days after they've been in office, let's start looking at goal setting and some other issues that you need to do. Just, you know, don't drop the ball because you're exhausted with the process and you want to move on. All right, what I said, and we talked some about our process, I promised I wasn't going to do a commercial, and if you do RFPs, we send somebody else, not me. Want to make sure that, again, that clean line. But regardless of what you do, you're our members. We're here for you. You know, we can help you with simple questions. You know, we want this to be a positive process, and are happy to help you in any way we can through it, because it's probably one of the most important decisions you will make as a board member.
Gentlemen, y'all have any more questions?
Very good.
Thank you so much, very good.
All right, hope you've had a good one. Derek, did you get the sign-in sheet? Did you sign in?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I took the last one home with me.
And you got you got even more than 2 hours of homework training. You are on.
And thanks to all of y'all for being here tonight.
It's about
$100 a piece.
And I will say, the
Maybe
board
check
gets
them
high
on the
marks for doing
website.
this, training and training doesn't always have to be, can be training, but they did it in a very transparent process. And some of the issues folks don't always like, to
I
talk
wasn't born yesterday.
about, but it is what it is. I was in Dothan, and they, and I knew as soon as that happened, I was like, they slammed the process of the consultant, about the whole application process, and I said, Alabama law is what it is. It's different in other states, but I know for a fact superintendents are reticent to put, sitting superintendents are reticent to apply for a job. If they've got a great relationship with the board, even though they may want to do the next, move up for community reasons, sometimes for, financial reasons, bigger system, bigger salary, and it's really hard to do that decision, if you think you're gonna kind of mess up a good situation at home. I would hope most school boards understand that the progression of superintendents is to move up from, you start out generally in the small system and move up. But we actually saw one superintendent, was actually actually in this community offered a job and her system wouldn't let her go out of her contract.
really?
Yeah, I've seen it happen once, oh yeah, it was just amazing. They said, no, we're not gonna release you. And they didn't. She didn't get the job. She left 2 years later, or a year later, at that point when the contract was up, so.
Fair enough.
Pardon?
Fair. I got a side part.
You want me to?
I mean, this has nothing to do with any of this.
Okay.
No,
I mean, it's just almost, to me, almost an ethical issue. That's class. And the new structure for class, if you're an elementary principal, it's $625. And part of that is because you've got to pay some exorbitant amount for some liability insurance, whether you does not apply to secondary principals. It's ridiculous. Somebody's getting stroked on that deal.
Wow.
I'm just saying.
No, that's the first I heard. I didn't know there was that differential
Oh,
in
it's
terms of that.
incredible. You can't either, if you're gonna be in class as an elementary principal, you pay $625. And your system may pay it or it may not. A lot of them don't.
Let's talk about that, Earl.
Go ahead.
It's an issue.
It is an
Because
issue.
school systems pay it.
Huh?
School systems most of the time pay those dues.
Not all of them.
Some of them do.
Well, some of them say they do, but you got PTOs paying these dues for principals and all this other kind of crap, and it's just all over the board. And, you know, you're hamstringing a lot of principals who can't afford to pay it, you know, and you're taking money from kids if you get PTO to pay for it. And, you know, and then some systems do pay for it. And $625, and then if you're a secondary principal, that's $100.
Have you looked at
I'm just out of
990?
curiosity, is that because they're associated with the national?
990.
group? Is that a
You
decision
can
made
you
by
can-
the national group?
Well, how would you,
They're
why would
$9.90
you
tax
differentiation
form.
between?
Federal
and
tax
secondary?
form.
There are separate
So you
organizations
can-
for secondary
Oh,
principals
see
and
how much
elementary
money they
principals,
take
and they have their own
They would
government.
probably say
They
that, but I'll
spend
say
what they
it's
spend.
ridiculous. For example, if I wanted to have
And
my
what their
roll call
executive director does.
$2 million,
Mhm.
it covers me up for everything. I wouldn't go to class just to get that little, some little nip. I mean, it's just, having no flexibility is almost extortion.
Yeah, my guess is, now
Or
that I'm
.org.
thinking about it, I think it's it must be a decision made by the national organizations that they just pass through.
They don't have
Because,
to. They shouldn't have to. It's just, it's inappropriate for a .org to extort that
Okay.
kind of requirement, in my opinion.
I'll give you Earl Frank's telephone
That's a problem. I'll load him up.
number. No, I mean, but that is interesting, yeah.
And we're talking about a heck of a lot of money, and inevitably, it's coming out of the
How
classroom.
much, yeah, I mean, that's a lot for, I mean, and you think if it's a national group policy, that seems to be really a lot of money for.
Well, their local dues, maybe $100, $200.
Yeah.
It's still, it's outrageous. And
Yeah,
it's coming
no.
out of the classroom, if any district pays for it, it's coming out of the classroom, because that money could be diverted somewhere else.
All right, I'll go, I'll
And you
find
take
out
all,
the
you
story.
take all elementary schools, it's on state my face, it's pretty doggone significant for a .org.
Well, that was one of the reasons that the state offered the educators liability. I mean, you know, liability
Get on
is
there.
offered.
Sovereign immunity.
You don't need it. I'm saying if.
Although, actually, you know, I would never be in a position to tell somebody what insurance coverage they need, because, you know,
Right.
there are some things that, you know, are perceived to be criminal in nature. I mean, one of the sexual harassment, sometimes one of those tough things, oh, we'll reimburse you if you're innocent, you know, I mean, there are some, and that's a real exposure for, you know, an allegation, you know, and I'm talking about people who are innocent,
Oh, yeah,
not
yeah.
people who have done anything.
But see, but so is the word tying, and that's what they're doing, is they're tying one thing to another. And it's just, they're conflicting, in my opinion.
Okay. I'll ask some questions and I will let you
I
know.
think that'd be good for
But, yeah.
a lot of money.
How much now?
$625
$625.
for an elementary principal.
And secondary principals are,
So
Which ironically, there are more elementary schools than there are high schools, you know, I mean,
Look
just
for
to
us.
share, you know, in terms of numbers, yeah.
If you want liability insurance, you know, for your job, Don Hewlett would probably jump at the chance. I mean, it would apply better to him, because this risk factor has got to be considerably more than elementary.
Yeah,
Sideline.
okay.
Sideline.
You had
That
one?
was it.
Okay. They got the same call, same as that.
Can I ask a question about the interim? I just want to throw this out. You know, in the next 6 months, we're probably going to have a lot of activity in the courts. You know, it's not going to go away. I think we'll probably see some things.
Which one are you talking about?
Talking about the rezoning issue and
Oh, yeah.
and the discussions that have come out of that. Why do we need rezoning? I mean, that stuff is blossoming at the national level with some involvement by national folks. So I do, you know, whoever that interim is, we can't just discount and say, you know, they're only going to be here for 6 months, because they really may have some tough issues to lead the system through. Or the board president will get to do that, right? So it does need to be somebody, I think, with some political skill and communication skill.
Absolutely.
Who can, if we
Totally
get hit
agree.
with something really bizarrely impactful.
Very important.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I you know, frankly, I love having help. Because if you make it unilaterally, you can't win. You're not gonna win anyway, but it's still be less of an impact if you have help. And we're about to have help.
Oh, yeah, with the 3 groups at the table, yeah. But it just,
I mean,
I
if there is
just, I
that.
think
if
we
there
need
is
to make
big
sure that we
problem.
get somebody who understands how to talk with the public about the struggles that we have and continue to have.
Struggles
Being that we have one majority black school and we have rezoning based on
it's not a
that
struggle, like you said.
No, I mean, well, the struggle is that it hasn't been addressed,
Well,
really.
it's attempted to be addressed
Right.
before this whole.
But that addressing of it is gonna be, what I'm saying is,
The addressing
it's
is
not,
the
it's not
problem.
gonna be rosy.
No.
I don't get the feeling it's gonna be
It hasn't
rosy and
been
everybody's
rosy.
gonna sing Kumbaya.
All three
So-
iterations have not been rosy, you know, and it's
Right.
not gonna get any better.
So thanks.
Rezoning is one of those issues where generally leaves most people, you know, the people that impacted generally are unhappy. And I'm not being
Exactly right.
No, hey,
cavalier
that affect
about
us.
it.
We don't have children in
But
school,
you're
right?
exactly right. I mean, if it doesn't affect you, you don't care.
That's a great
Yeah,
idea.
oh, yeah,
Yeah, you don't care.
Well, see, it's all where you sit. It's all where you sit. Has as much things in life these days, it seems.
Oh, that's one of those issues, closing schools. You can close schools for the best, you know, the best reasons, and one of my favorite board members is no longer board member. Because of that decision. Yeah, you know.
No, I mean, is that what happened? I think it
Oh, no, not that, no,
Okay.
no, this was a while back, but, you know, just made a tough decision, you know, and, yeah, elected board member, you know, it was the right thing for kids, you know, but, you know, community didn't like it.
Here's another wild one for you. We were talking about this Monday night. The old Miami-Dade County Superintendent.
Oh, yeah.
Can we get him?
Can we get him?
Well, we don't have
Y'all
to.
be impressed.
Yeah.
He did
He didn't like him.
He did do a second look on
Derek
that.
got his card.
Yeah, Derek got his call.
Hey,
But
do you
y'all
have a
can
friend
do
of
that.
mine?
You can call people and ask them to
We
apply.
do
These songs
not,
are-
we do
Yes.
not.
I would like
Wow.
I
having.
mean, they can call people and ask them to.
350
Yeah.
350,000 students, 60
Yeah, I want
different
to get
languages
to know, is
spoken
it
in
53
school.
municipalities?
You might
Yeah,
enjoy a
listen to
break.
this, listen how many municipalities that they had, 53.
And what I love, he finally came clean, he goes, you know, myself and the county manager, we're kind of peers.
Well, you know, let's not forget, school system, do we still have a larger budget than the city? I mean,
Oh, yeah,
technically.
every time the president of the city council talks, he tells us that.
That's right.
And if we have any questions, we'll go ask Trey Lott.
Don't get me started.
How many municipalities are in Mobile County?
Oh,
There's a bunch.
65,000
yeah.
Yeah,
Huh?
They're not 300,000 kids.
665, I believe.
Yeah. How'd y'all
I
find
I found it very interesting at one of our conferences. I don't remember who that superintendent of Mobile is now, says that their transportation system is the second largest transportation system in the southeast, second only to MARTA,
Wow.
with the number of miles that they travel.
I bet you Jefferson County's up there too.
Well, but you look at Mobile County compared to Jefferson
Oh,
County in
yeah,
size.
Yeah, and it's all
believe
one
it.
school
Yeah.
system. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He said next to MARTA, they operated the second largest transportation.
You may recall that Mobile recruited Roy Nichols in
Oh,
to
yeah.
get them straightened out. He used to be the assistant superintendent in the Birmingham City Schools under Wilmer Cody in the 70s. In fact, I taught with his wife at Lakeview School, and he was the assistant superintendent that set up their middle school program. But then he came in for a short period, got them for about 3 or 4 years, I think, and then I went ahead and retired. But that was an
Yeah,
example.
boy, he did a good job.
Yeah.
You know, he really did.
Not without controversy.
What?
There's a not without controversy. They
They
always
change
end with some
Yeah.
controversy.
There's always that.
He did.
You know, going back to what you mentioned about the elected person that did the right thing for the students, but it cost him his position. Wow, is that not what we're supposed to do?
Well, you know,
What's
my
the best thing
favorite,
for our students, regardless of whether we may get reelected or not?
You were anointed, not elected.
I was looking for his position.
Anointed, I like that.
Yeah.
Caught it.
That's very Old Testament.
Yes, it is.
well, I think anyone who does community services is anointed, and it's important. But, you know, we're the public in public education, but I always, say getting community input is important, but also you do have expertise. I mean, you're the community's voice, but you have expertise, you have information. We don't, run school systems, cities, or anything else by, whim or shifts of public opinion, there's a reason that this system of government has worked as long as it has, and you are empowered with knowledge, and you're expected to use that knowledge for the betterment of
See, therein
students.
lies the rub though, because everybody wants all the information and no one has all the information. And, and your constant quest, and we hear communication problems here, and, it's a constant quest to have all the information so you can make the best informed decision, but, this is a part-time person, you're not gonna always have all the information. I'm not sure anybody has all the information.
But
You have to go with what you got.
some of that, producing the information, is so that there's some oversight capability. That's what it's about. You may not actually be eating the information, but when you have to produce it, it's like a budget or diary, food diary. If I'm gonna write down everything that I eat, I'm gonna know what I'm doing. It's just like you said about the No Child Left Behind data, right? I mean, that is the best part of No Child Left Behind for me, because I think Hoover was exactly the kind of system that No Child Left Behind. We had small groups of kids hidden within some really easy test scores. And so it made us kind of break it all out and look at it. And even though it's a pain, even though it's irritating, do you know up in the north that they vote on their school budgets? They actually send it out to the public, and the public votes on the school budget. And sometimes they vote 5 and 6 times on the school budget. I mean, they're generally small communities, and not all of them though, and they get these massive budget presentations, and it's the buy-in that you get. See, there's an exchange there. You trade information for buy-in, and they sort of do this like a rubber band. And when there's no information, there's a little buy-in. It depends on who you want buy-in from, who you need buy-in from.
Yeah, I agree to a point, but on the flip side of it, if you look at this community, nobody votes for anything, really.
But you have to ask yourself why, Earl.
That's exactly, either
You have to ask
they're
yourself
agnostic
why.
or
Or they're apathetic because it doesn't matter to
or
them.
they're
Because
satisfied with the goods and services that are given.
I'll send you a video. It's a great little 7-minute video called The Antidote to Apathy. And I was thinking about this with this job description,
Trish,
right?
I don't give a damn about that.
I know you don't. But no, it was like, it said,
There's a joke about that.
I know.
Whatever the joke is.
but what's interesting is it says like, this guy who lives in Toronto, and he's like a community activist, and so it ended up being a TED talk. But he said, you know, do we really, if we want people at meetings, why do we have the print really small and nobody can read it? If you're a marketer and you want people to buy your products, you know, you put it in a really attractive way and you make sure it reaches people. But the government stuff is so boring and it's not lively at all. And he does it. It's a very good visual presentation.
I'll give you the answer to that one though, because if you hired a communications person to do it and a consultant used color and printed it, someone would blast you for wasting government money for, I mean.
But you don't, well, but this is what he was saying.
You feel like you're like that.
It doesn't have to be printed anymore. And that's what he's saying. We're not taking advantage of the ways that we have to communicate now. Like job description, right? I mean, I can see the job description now with the first part of it is all in caps with a colon, job requirements, right?
Yeah.
But what if you had, you know, you want to join a team that's always in the news? You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's all in how you present it. Like, who are you going to attract to this kind of job? If you know, it's communications 101 is what it's about. But that's what this guy was saying with respect to the government. If you really want government, if the government really wants you involved in something, they're going to make it attractive to you. And they're going to pull you in.
They're going to make it mandatory that you're involved in it.
Exactly. Well, in Alabama, I'll give you that. In
Volunteer,
Alabama.
I'll give you that.
Aren't there some elected superintendents, or my mistake,
Have you heard about
There
what
are some.
health
I don't know,
insurance
like
for
46
fees,
or
for
48.
in Alabama?
if you don't participate in the wellness screenings, and granted, the screenings are free, it's $50 per month for an individual, and if you're married, if your spouse doesn't get the screening, it's another $50 a
In
month.
addition to the basic premium?
Mhm.
What if you
I
don't,
missed the
what
first
if you don't take the PHIP at all? Just
Screening.
move
Well, no,
forward?
this is just PHIP, you know,
PHIP.
in terms of, part of their wellness program, and they had free health screenings, and they would come to your site and do that. If you don't get the health screening before May, every individual will pay $50 more per month.
Oh my gosh,
They got-
And
they
if
got
you're
price.
married, if your spouse is, and the wellness program's designed to, and I can't remember, screen, I think one of them's diabetes, you know, COPD, you know, some of the, and basically it's just, they don't say that you have to participate in the actual coaching, but that's going to be the follow-up, but the idea is to take greater ownership. And so the state basic rate is going to be what the state pays, and as an employer, I have to tell my employees, is like, you know, we will pay the basic rate, you know, the screening's free, if you don't get the screening, we're not gonna pay the, you know, the $50 a month. That just came out in a webinar,
And the
our
RSA
principal
bulletin.
Listen to that today.
Hey, I got one for you. This'll really frost you. They just passed as part of this budget, that's come up for a vote, that large underfunded pension programs can slash benefits to existing and future retirees to compensate for all the lack of funding.
I saw that too, and I was thinking, man, you know, and the response was, somebody's better than no money, because, you know,